My uncle edited me out of all family photos at my grandfather's funeral because I brought shame to the family by divorcing his daughter. I was staring at a photograph of my grandfather's casket surrounded by family when I realized I wasn't in it. Not because I'd stepped away for that particular shot. I was standing right there when it was taken, third from the left, between my cousin and my aunt. But in the framed print being passed around the reception hall, I'd been seamlessly removed. My cousin now stood impossibly close to my aunt, the background slightly blurred where my body should have been. My hands went cold. I grabbed another photo from the memorial table. Same thing. Then another. In every single photograph from the funeral, the wake, even the family dinner the night before, I'd been erased. Photoshopped out like I'd never existed. I was holding a picture of myself giving the eulogy, except it just showed an empty podium with my grandfather's portrait beside it. My voice was probably still on the video recording, disembodied, coming from nowhere. I felt my breath catch in my chest, that specific sensation when reality tilts and you can't quite process what you're seeing. Around me, relatives I'd known my entire life were chatting, laughing softly, sharing memories. None of them seemed to notice. Or maybe they did notice, and that was worse. I'd been married to Rebecca for 6 years when everything fell apart, but the cracks started long before I filed the papers. We met in college. She was studying art history, I was in engineering, and for the first few years, it worked. Her family embraced me immediately. Her father, my now former uncle-in-law Gerald Thorne, owned a successful commercial real estate firm in Denver, and he treated me like the son he never had. He got me a job at his company doing property assessments, invited me to golf weekends, included me in family investments. I thought I'd married into the kind of family I'd always wanted. Close-knit, successful, supportive. My own parents had died in a car accident when I was 19, and my grandfather had raised me from that point forward. So when the Thornes welcomed me, it felt like I'd finally found solid ground again. Rebecca and I bought a house in Cherry Creek with help from her father. We talked about kids. We planned vacations to Italy and Thailand. On paper, everything looked perfect. But Rebecca started changing around year 4. She became distant, critical, obsessed with appearances. Every conversation turned into a comparison with her friends' husbands, their homes, their cars, their lives. The breaking point came when I discovered she'd opened 3 credit cards in my name and maxed them out. $47,000 in debt I knew nothing about. Designer clothes, spa weekends, jewelry she hid from me. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She said I was financially controlling for questioning her spending, that I was emotionally unavailable, that I didn't understand the pressure she was under to maintain a certain lifestyle. Her lifestyle, the one her father's money had built. I suggested counseling. She refused. I suggested financial planning. She called me cheap. I asked what she actually wanted from our marriage. She looked at me like I was stupid and said, "More." Just that. More. I filed for divorce 3 weeks later, and that's when the Thorne family machinery activated. Gerald called me into his office and told me I was making a catastrophic mistake. He offered me $25,000 to stay married to his daughter for another year, to work things out properly. When I refused, his expression went from paternal to arctic in seconds. He told me I was throwing away my career, my reputation, and my place in a family that matters. I walked out. 2 days later, I was fired from his company for performance issues that didn't exist. Rebecca's mother started a whisper campaign through their social circle, painting me as controlling, abusive, mentally unstable. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Rebecca hired Dwight Kellerman, an attorney known for scorched earth tactics in high-net-worth divorces, and they came after me for spousal support, half the house that her father had helped us buy, and compensation for emotional damages from my alleged abuse. I had to hire a forensic accountant to prove the credit card fraud. I had to provide phone records, emails, text messages, to demonstrate I'd never been controlling or abusive or just a husband who'd discovered his wife was financially destroying him. Judge Patricia Brennan, a 32-year veteran of Denver Family Court, saw through the fiction. She ruled in my favor on virtually every point, dismissed the abuse allegations as unsupported and apparently strategic, ordered Rebecca to pay back half the fraudulent debt, and gave me the house. The Thornes were furious. Gerald tried to appeal. It went nowhere. The divorce was finalized on May 14, 2023. I thought that was the end of it. I changed jobs, moved to a different neighborhood, started rebuilding my life. I stayed in touch with my grandfather, who lived in Colorado Springs, about 90 minutes south. He'd always liked Rebecca, but never pressured me about the divorce. He just asked if I was okay, told me he was proud of me for standing up for myself, and invited me to dinner every few weeks. My grandfather, Edward Callahan, died on October 3, 2024, at age 86. Cardiac arrest in his sleep. Peaceful, according to the coroner. I was devastated. He'd been my anchor since my parents died, the one person who never judged, never demanded, never manipulated, just loved me. The funeral was scheduled for October 8th at Sacred Heart Church, with a reception afterward at the Pines Event Center. I drove down the morning of the service, wearing the navy suit my grandfather had bought me for my college graduation. The church was packed. He'd been a veteran, a longtime Rotary Club member, active in his parish. I saw relatives I hadn't spoken to in years, family friends, neighbors, and I saw the Thorns. Rebecca was sitting in the third pew with her parents and her younger brother, Ethan. Gerald looked at me once, his face expressionless, then looked away. Rebecca didn't acknowledge my existence. I sat on the opposite side of the church with distant cousins and focused on the service. I gave the eulogy. I'd worked on it for 3 days, trying to capture who my grandfather actually was. Not a saint, not a hero, just a good man who showed up when it mattered. My voice cracked twice. People cried. Afterward, several relatives hugged me, told me it was beautiful, told me Edward would have loved it. At the reception, I noticed Gerald standing near the photo memorial table, talking quietly with a younger man I didn't recognize. The man had a professional camera bag slung over his shoulder and was showing Gerald something on a laptop. I thought maybe he was the photographer they'd hired to document the service. People were taking photos throughout the reception. Family groupings, candid shots, pictures with my grandfather's portrait. I was in dozens of them. I stood with my Aunt Linda and her kids. I posed with my second cousins from Durango. I was photographed shaking hands with Father Dominic, the priest who'd performed the service. A woman with a Nikon kept directing people into arrangements, making sure everyone was included. At one point, she specifically asked me to stand closer to the center for a large family group shot. I remember that clearly because she said, "You gave such a moving eulogy, we want you front and center." I stood there, surrounded by probably 30 relatives, and smiled despite everything. My grandfather would have wanted that. Unity. Family. Even if half the people in that photo secretly agreed with the Thorns that I was the villain in Rebecca's story. I stayed until the reception ended around 6 p.m., helped fold chairs, threw away paper plates, thanked the event coordinator. I drove home feeling hollowed out but also relieved. I'd honored my grandfather. I'd maintained my dignity. I'd shown the Thorns that their disapproval couldn't touch me anymore. I was wrong. 3 days after the funeral, my Aunt Linda called. She lived in Boulder, worked as a public school principal, and had always been kind to me throughout the divorce. Her voice was tense. She said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Did you leave the funeral early? Like, before the family photos?" I told her no. I was there until the end. I was in probably 20 different photos. She went quiet for a moment, then said, "That's what I thought. Listen, Gerald posted the memorial album on the family Facebook page last night. You're not in any of the pictures. Not one. At first, I thought maybe you'd just been out of frame, but then I looked closer and it's obvious. You've been edited out." I pulled up Facebook on my laptop while she was talking. Sure enough, Gerald had created a digital album titled Celebrating Edward Callahan, A Life Well Lived. 63 photos. I clicked through them methodically, my stomach tightening with each image. In the group shot where I'd been front and center, I was gone. The woman who'd been standing to my left was now awkwardly close to the man on my right, and the background pattern didn't quite match. In the photo of me giving the eulogy, the podium was empty, just my grandfather's portrait on an easel beside it, and a microphone pointed at nothing. In the candid shot of me talking with Father Dominic, the priest was now photographed alone, mid-gesture, as if talking to air. My cousin Jenna later told me that one looked especially creepy. Every photograph had been doctored. Some were subtle, a blurred edge where my shoulder had been, a slightly warped perspective where the background had been stretched to fill the space I'd occupied. Others were blatant. In one shot, my Aunt Linda appeared to have 3 hands because the editor hadn't properly removed my arm from where it had been draped around her shoulder. The comment section was full of relatives praising Gerald for putting together such a beautiful tribute, thanking him for his hard work, sharing their favorite memories. No one mentioned the obvious editing. No one asked where I was. I sat staring at the screen, my hands shaking, feeling something I hadn't felt since the worst days of the divorce, that nauseating combination of rage and helplessness. This wasn't just petty spite. This was calculated erasure. Gerald had hired someone to systematically remove me from my own grandfather's funeral, then distributed the edited photos as the official record. I called Gerald's cell. It went to voicemail. I called his office. His assistant Natalie told me he was unavailable and asked if I wanted to leave a message. I said, "Tell him I know what he did to the funeral photos, and he needs to call me back immediately." She paused, then said in a carefully neutral voice, "I'll pass that along." He didn't call back. I tried Rebecca. Blocked. I tried Ethan, her brother. He answered, listened to me explain what I'd discovered, and said flatly, "You brought shame to this family. You divorced my sister and dragged her through court. You humiliated her in front of everyone who matters. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" I asked what the funeral photos had to do with any of that. He said, "You don't get to be part of this family anymore. Not in life, not in pictures, not in memory. Dad made that clear." Then he hung up. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, trying to process the sheer vindictiveness of it. This wasn't about protecting Rebecca. This was about control, about punishing me for refusing to stay in line, for refusing Gerald's money, for winning in court. About erasing me so thoroughly that future generations would look at those photos and never know I existed. I thought about my grandfather, who'd loved me unconditionally, and how Gerald had stolen even that, rewriting history so it looked like I hadn't been there to honor him. I contacted an attorney the next morning. His name was Russell Haynes, a guy I'd worked with during the divorce who specialized in defamation and family law. I explained the situation, sent him screenshots of the edited photos, asked if I had any legal recourse. He looked through everything and called me back within 2 hours. I've seen petty family behavior, but this is a different level, he said. The problem is, it's not technically illegal. Photoshopping you out of pictures and posting them online, it's shitty. But it's not defamation unless he's making false statements about you. And it's not harassment unless he's directly contacting you with threatening or abusive messages. It's a gray area. I asked if I could sue for emotional distress or something. He sighed. You could try, but judges don't typically award damages for hurt feelings, especially in family disputes. And Gerald has money for a long legal fight. You'd be looking at $30,000 minimum in legal fees just to make him take the photos down, and there's no guarantee you'd win. I felt the frustration building. So he just gets away with it? Russell's voice softened. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the legal system isn't set up to handle this kind of psychological warfare. But there might be another angle. Did your grandfather leave a will? I told him yes, he'd left me a portion of his estate. It's about $85,000 in savings bonds and some personal items. Russell asked if Gerald was the executor. I said yes, my grandfather had named him years ago, back when Gerald and I were still on good terms. That's your leverage, Russell said. If Gerald is manipulating the family narrative this aggressively, there's a chance he's also manipulating the estate. Has the will been probated yet? I told him I'd received a letter from Gerald's attorney saying the estate was being processed, and I'd receive my inheritance within 6 to 8 months. Russell made a note. That's a long timeline for a straightforward estate. I want you to request a full accounting. You're a beneficiary. You have the legal right to see all financial records, all distributions, all executor fees. If Gerald's charging excessive fees or delaying distributions to maintain control, we can challenge his role as executor. I agreed to send the formal request. Russell drafted it that afternoon, and I mailed it certified to Gerald's attorney. Then I waited. Days turned into weeks. No response. I followed up. Gerald's attorney, a man named Philip Cortland, sent a terse email saying the accounting would be provided in due course, and I needed to be patient with the probate process. Meanwhile, the edited photos remained on Facebook. I reported them to the platform for violating community standards. Facebook's automated response said they didn't violate any policies. I started noticing other things. Family members who'd been friendly at the funeral stopped responding to my messages. My cousin Jenna, who'd always been close to me, sent a short text. I can't be in the middle of this. I'm sorry. When I asked what that meant, she didn't reply. My Aunt Linda called and said she'd been asked not to communicate with me by Gerald, who was handling my grandfather's estate and didn't want complications. I asked if she was serious. She said, he's threatening to contest portions of the will if people don't cooperate. I can't risk that. I'm sorry, but I have to stay neutral. I realized what was happening. Gerald wasn't just erasing me from photos. He was erasing me from the family, using his control over the estate as leverage to isolate me, to make me the outsider, the problem, the person everyone had to avoid to stay in his good graces. I felt like I was living through the divorce all over again, watching people I'd trusted choose convenience and money over integrity. The loneliness was crushing. My grandfather was gone. My family was turning away, and Gerald was orchestrating it all from behind the scenes, rewriting reality to suit his narrative. I spent hours going through my own photos from the funeral, the ones I'd taken on my phone. I was in them. Proof I'd been there. But what did that matter when the official record said otherwise? I decided to make the situation public. On November 2nd, I posted on my own Facebook page, explaining what had happened, the edited photos, Gerald's refusal to respond, the family pressure to stay silent. I included side-by-side comparisons of the edited photos and the originals I'd taken on my phone, clearly showing where I'd been removed. I wrote, my uncle has decided to erase me from my grandfather's funeral because I divorced his daughter. This isn't about family loyalty. This is about control and punishment. I was there. I gave the eulogy. I honored the man who raised me, and I won't be erased. I tagged several family members, including Gerald. The post went semi-viral within my extended network. Hundreds of shares, thousands of comments, most of them supportive. People were outraged. Strangers messaged me saying they'd experienced similar family manipulation. A few local news outlets reached out, asking if I'd be willing to be interviewed. I declined. I didn't want media attention. I just wanted my family to acknowledge what Gerald had done. But the post had consequences I hadn't anticipated. Gerald's attorney sent me a cease and desist letter, claiming I was defaming Gerald by making false and malicious accusations about his character. The letter demanded I remove the post within 48 hours or face a defamation lawsuit. I forwarded the letter to Russell, who read it and laughed, not in a comforting way, but in a dark, knowing way. This is a slap suit threat, he said. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. He's trying to silence you by threatening expensive litigation. He knows he'd lose a defamation case because everything you posted is true and provable, but he also knows the threat alone might scare you into backing down. I asked what I should do. Russell said, don't remove the post. In fact, I'm going to respond to his attorney and make it clear that we're prepared to defend against any lawsuit, and that we'll be filing a motion for attorney's fees under Colorado's anti-SLAPP statute if he proceeds. We'll also be filing a formal complaint with the probate court about his conduct as executor. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Do it. Russell sent the response that afternoon. For a few days, nothing happened. Then, on November 7th, I received a call from a woman named Dr. Angela Reeves, a licensed psychologist who specialized in family systems therapy. She said Rebecca had contacted her, claiming I was stalking and harassing her family, and that I'd posted manipulated photos online to publicly humiliate Gerald. Dr. Reeves said she was calling as a courtesy to get my side of the story before making any recommendations to Rebecca about protective orders or intervention. I was stunned. I explained the entire situation, the divorce, the edited photos, the estate manipulation, the cease and desist letter. I sent Dr. Reeves the original and edited photos, the certified letters, the timeline of events. She reviewed everything over the following week and called me back on November 14th. Her tone had changed completely. "Mr. Callahan, I need to be very direct with you," she said. "What I'm seeing here is a textbook case of familial estrangement as a weapon. Rebecca's claims about stalking and harassment are not supported by any evidence. In fact, the evidence suggests you've been the target of a sustained campaign to isolate and discredit you. The photo editing is particularly concerning because it demonstrates a level of premeditation and investment in erasing your existence. That's not normal family conflict. That's pathological." I asked what that meant for me. She said, "It means you need to document everything, every interaction, every message, every incident. If this escalates, and based on the pattern I'm seeing, it likely will, you'll need a clear record to protect yourself legally and psychologically. I'd also recommend you consider filing a complaint with the probate court about Gerald's conduct as executor. His behavior suggests he may be using his role to manipulate family members and control the narrative around your grandfather's estate." I thanked her and asked if she'd be willing to provide a written assessment if needed. She agreed. I felt a small measure of validation, but also a creeping dread. If a licensed psychologist thought this was pathological, what else was Gerald capable of? The answer came 2 weeks later. On November 28th, the day before Thanksgiving, I received a notice from the probate court. Gerald had filed a motion to contest my inheritance, claiming that my grandfather had verbally expressed, shortly before his death, that he wanted to disinherit me due to the pain and embarrassment I'd caused the family through my divorce. The motion included a sworn affidavit from Rebecca stating that she'd been present during a conversation in August 2024 when my grandfather allegedly said he was ashamed of me and intended to remove me from the will. There was also an affidavit from Gerald himself, corroborating Rebecca's account. The motion argued that even though the written will included me as a beneficiary, the court should honor my grandfather's true final wishes, as expressed verbally. I read the motion 3 times, my hands shaking harder each time. It was a lie, a complete fabrication. I'd seen my grandfather in August. We'd had dinner at his favorite Italian restaurant in Colorado Springs. He'd told me he was proud of me, that he was glad I'd stood up for myself during the divorce. He'd never said anything about being ashamed or wanting to disinherit me, but proving that was going to be nearly impossible. It was my word against theirs, and they had 2 sworn affidavits. I called Russell immediately. He was already aware. The court had copied him on the filing. "This is escalating fast," he said. "They're not just erasing you from photos anymore. They're trying to erase you from the will. Gerald knows you can't disprove a verbal statement from a dead man. It's a smart legal strategy, even if it's completely unethical." I asked what we could do. Russell said, "We fight it. We depose Rebecca and Gerald. We subpoena your grandfather's medical records to show his mental state in August. We bring in Dr. Reeves to testify about the pattern of manipulation. But I need to be honest with you. This is going to be expensive, and the outcome isn't guaranteed. Judges have discretion in probate cases, and if Gerald's attorney can create enough doubt about your grandfather's intentions, the judge might rule in their favor." I felt the weight of it settling on me. This wasn't about $85,000. This was about my grandfather's memory, about the last connection I had to my family, about refusing to let Gerald rewrite reality one more time. I told Russell to prepare for depositions. We scheduled Rebecca's for December 12th and Gerald's for December 14th. In the meantime, I started going through every text, email, and photo I had from my grandfather, looking for anything that might prove his true feelings toward me. I found something. On September 10th, 2024, 3 weeks before he died, my grandfather had sent me an email. The subject line was, "Estate Planning Update." I'd skimmed it at the time, not thinking much of it, but now I read it carefully. He wrote, "Just wanted to let you know I met with my attorney last week to review the will. Everything is in order. You, Linda, and a few others are set as beneficiaries, and I've made it clear that Gerald's role as executor is administrative only. He's not to contest or alter any distributions. I trust him to follow my wishes, but I wanted you to know that my wishes are firm and documented. You've been a good grandson, and I'm proud of the man you've become. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I stared at that last sentence. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Had he known? Had he suspected that Gerald might try something like this after he was gone? I forwarded the email to Russell immediately. He called back within minutes, his voice animated. This is huge. This is dated less than a month before your grandfather's death, and it directly contradicts their claim that he wanted to disinherit you. It also establishes that he specifically instructed Gerald not to contest distributions. We can use this to argue that Gerald is violating his fiduciary duty as executor. I'm filing a motion to remove him from that role and appoint an independent administrator. The next few weeks were a blur of legal filings, court hearings, and depositions. Rebecca's deposition was on December 12th, held at Philip Cortland's law office in downtown Denver. She walked in wearing a black Armani suit, her hair perfectly styled, her expression cold. Russell questioned her methodically, asking her to describe in detail the alleged conversation in August, where my grandfather supposedly said he was ashamed of me. She claimed it happened on August 22nd at my grandfather's house. She said she'd stopped by to drop off some groceries. She liked to check on him every few weeks, and found him sitting in his living room, looking at old family photos. She said he pointed to a picture of me and said, "It breaks my heart what he did to you. I'm embarrassed to call him my grandson. I've been thinking about changing my will." Russell asked if anyone else was present. She said no. He asked if she'd told anyone about this conversation at the time. She hesitated, then said she'd mentioned it to her father, but no one else. Russell asked why she hadn't mentioned it to me, or to my grandfather's attorney, or to anyone else in the family. She said it wasn't her place to share private conversations. Russell then pulled out my grandfather's calendar. I'd found it among his personal effects, and it showed every appointment and visitor for the months before his death. On August 22nd, my grandfather had a dentist appointment in the morning and a Rotary Club meeting in the afternoon. There was no notation of Rebecca visiting. Russell asked her to explain the discrepancy. She stammered, said she must have misremembered the date. He pressed her. Could it have been a different day? She said maybe August 29th. He showed her the calendar again. August 29th. My grandfather was in the hospital overnight for observation after a minor fall. Rebecca's face flushed. She said she must be confusing it with another time, that it was hard to remember exact dates. Russell asked, "Is it possible this conversation never happened?" She snapped, "I know what I heard." He let the silence hang, then asked, "Miss Thorne, did your father ask you to provide this affidavit?" She hesitated. Her attorney interjected, instructing her not to answer. But the damage was done. The hesitation was enough. Gerald's deposition 2 days later was even more contentious. He walked in radiating confidence, a man used to controlling rooms. Russell asked him to describe the alleged conversation where my grandfather expressed shame about me. Gerald's account was almost identical to Rebecca's. Same general time frame, same setting, same words. Russell asked if he'd been present during the conversation Rebecca described. Gerald said no, but she'd told him about it immediately afterward. Russell asked why he hadn't mentioned this to anyone before filing the motion to contest the will. Gerald said he'd been respecting my father-in-law's privacy and only came forward when he realized it was his duty as executor to honor Edward's true wishes. Russell then presented my grandfather's email from September 10th, the one explicitly stating that his wishes were firm and documented, and that Gerald was not to contest distributions. Gerald's expression flickered. He said the email didn't reflect my grandfather's later change of heart. Russell asked, when exactly did this change of heart occur? Gerald said sometime in late September, after Rebecca's visit. Russell asked if there was any documentation of this, any emails, any updated legal documents, any witnesses. Gerald said no, but Edward told me personally. Russell asked when. Gerald said he couldn't remember the exact date. Russell showed him my grandfather's phone records, which I'd obtained through the estate. There were no calls between Gerald and my grandfather in September. Gerald claimed it must have been an in-person conversation. Russell asked where. Gerald said at Edward's house. Russell asked when. Gerald said he'd have to check his calendar. The deposition ended with Gerald visibly irritated, his attorney trying to shut down further questioning. Russell filed a supplemental motion that evening, attaching the deposition transcripts and arguing that Rebecca and Gerald had committed perjury. He also filed a motion to remove Gerald as executor based on breach of fiduciary duty and evidence of estate manipulation. The probate hearing was scheduled for January 9, 2025, just over 3 months after my grandfather's death. Judge Kenneth Stafford, a 63-year-old jurist known for his no-nonsense approach to estate disputes, presided. Russell presented our case methodically. The email from my grandfather explicitly protecting my inheritance, the inconsistencies in Rebecca and Gerald's depositions, the phone records and calendar proving their timeline didn't match reality, and Dr. Reeves's assessment of the broader pattern of manipulation and erasure. Philip Cortland argued that the email was generic estate planning communication and didn't preclude a later change of heart. He argued that Rebecca and Gerald's accounts were substantially consistent and reflected Edward's genuine feelings. He tried to paint me as a bitter ex-husband using the legal system to harass his former in-laws. Judge Stafford listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, and asked pointed questions. He asked Cortland to explain why my grandfather would send an email in September explicitly protecting my inheritance if he'd already expressed a desire to disinherit me in August. Cortland said the timing might be confused. Judge Stafford asked how two people could confuse dates in nearly identical ways. Cortland had no good answer. The judge asked Russell if he had any evidence that Gerald had financially benefited from his role as executor beyond standard fees. Russell presented records showing Gerald had charged the estate $18,000 in executor fees, triple the typical amount for an estate of this size, and had delayed distributions to other beneficiaries while prioritizing payments to his own business expenses. Judge Stafford's ruling came down on January 15th. He denied Gerald's motion to contest my inheritance, finding that the evidence does not support the claim that Edward Callahan intended to disinherit his grandson, and the inconsistencies in the respondent's testimony raise serious questions about their credibility. He also removed Gerald as executor, citing breach of fiduciary duty, excessive fees, and evidence of personal animus affecting his ability to administer the estate impartially. He appointed a neutral third-party administrator, attorney Michelle Grayson, to oversee the remaining distribution process. The ruling included a scathing paragraph. The court finds particularly troubling the attempt to manipulate the probate process to serve personal vendettas. An executor's role is to honor the decedent's wishes, not to rewrite them. The respondent's conduct in this matter falls well below the standard expected of fiduciaries. I felt a wave of vindication reading those words. But the judge went further. He ordered Gerald to pay my attorney's fees, $24,000, and referred the matter to the Colorado Office of Attorney Regulation for investigation into whether Philip Cortland had knowingly presented false testimony. The order was made public record. Within days, local legal blogs picked up the story. The headline in one read, "Prominent Denver developer removed as estate executor after judge finds credibility issues." I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. On January 22nd, I received a message on Facebook from someone I didn't know, a woman named Caitlin Foster. She said she'd seen the news coverage about the probate case and needed to talk to me urgently. I was wary, but something in her message felt genuine. I agreed to meet her at a coffee shop in downtown Denver the next afternoon. She arrived carrying a folder full of documents, her expression nervous. She introduced herself as a former employee of Gerald's real estate company. She'd worked there as a junior accountant from 2019 to 2023. "I left because I couldn't stomach what I was seeing," she said. "But when I saw your case in the news, I realized I had information you needed." She explained that during her time at the company, she'd noticed irregularities in how Gerald handled family trusts and estates. He'd been named executor or trustee for multiple relatives over the years, and in several cases, he'd used his position to funnel estate money into his own business ventures, delay distributions to beneficiaries he didn't like, and charge excessive fees. "I brought it up to him once," she said. "He told me it was family business and I needed to stay in my lane. When I kept asking questions, he fired me. But I kept copies of everything." She slid the folder across the table. Inside were spreadsheets, bank statements, and emails showing a pattern of estate manipulation going back over a decade. There were at least 5 other cases where Gerald had served as executor and engaged in similar behavior, delaying distributions, charging excessive fees, using estate funds for personal expenses. In one case, he'd contested a bequest to a nephew who'd disrespected him at a family gathering. In another, he'd liquidated estate assets at below market value and sold them to his own company. Caitlin also had emails between Gerald and Philip Cortland discussing strategy for managing difficult beneficiaries, including one email from August 2024, shortly after my grandfather's death, where Gerald wrote, "We need to box my name out of the estate. He's already turned the family against Rebecca, and I won't let him profit from Edward's death. Find me an angle." I stared at that email, feeling sick. This wasn't about my grandfather's wishes. This had never been about my grandfather. Gerald had planned to contest my inheritance before my grandfather was even buried. Caitlin said she'd gone to the Colorado Attorney General's office with the documents months ago, but they'd told her they needed a formal complaint from an affected party to proceed. She asked if I'd be willing to file. I said yes immediately. We contacted Russell that evening. He reviewed the documents and whistled low. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and possibly criminal misappropriation of estate funds. If even half of this holds up, Gerald's looking at disbarment for his attorney, civil penalties, and potential criminal charges." We filed a formal complaint with the Colorado Attorney General's office on January 30th, attaching Caitlin's documentation and requesting a full investigation into Gerald's conduct as a fiduciary in multiple estates. We also filed a separate civil suit on behalf of the other affected beneficiaries Caitlin had identified, seeking restitution and damages. The Attorney General's office opened an investigation on February 5th. A week later, a special investigator named Lawrence Dupont contacted me. He was a former FBI white-collar crime agent, now working as a consultant for the state. He spent 4 hours interviewing me, going through every detail of my case: the divorce, the funeral photos, the probate fight, the emails. He asked about Gerald's business practices, his relationships with other family members, his reputation in the real estate community. I told him everything I knew. Dupont said they were also interviewing the other beneficiaries Caitlin had identified and reviewing financial records from Gerald's company. "This is bigger than your case," he said. "We're looking at a pattern of fiduciary abuse spanning over a decade. If the evidence supports it, we'll be recommending criminal charges." I asked how long the investigation would take. He said at least 6 months, possibly longer. I settled in to wait. In the meantime, my inheritance was finally distributed. Michelle Grayson, the new court-appointed administrator, processed everything within 3 weeks of her appointment. I received the $85,000 in savings bonds, plus my grandfather's watch, his military medals, and a handwritten letter he'd left for me. The letter was dated September 12th, 2024, 2 days after the email he'd sent. It read, "If you're reading this, I'm gone. I want you to know that you made me proud every single day. You stood up for yourself when it mattered, even when it cost you. That takes courage. Don't let the thorns rewrite history. You were a good husband until you couldn't be anymore, and you're a good man now. That's what matters. Live well, love deeply. Don't waste time on people who can't see your worth." Grandpa, I cried reading it, not from sadness, but from relief. He'd known. He'd known exactly what Gerald would try to do, and he'd left me the tools to fight back. The edited funeral photos were still online, but I stopped caring about them. They were just pictures, manipulated images that told a lie anyone who wanted the truth could see through. What mattered was the real record. The emails, the letters, the legal rulings, the investigation. The truth couldn't be photoshopped away. On March 18th, 2025, the Colorado Attorney General's office announced charges against Gerald Thorne. 5 counts of breach of fiduciary duty, 3 counts of fraud, and 2 counts of misappropriation of estate funds. Philip Cortland was also charged with 1 count of subornation of perjury for knowingly presenting false testimony in the probate case. The story made front-page news in the Denver Post. Gerald's real estate company lost 3 major clients within a week. Rebecca filed for divorce from him. Wait, no. Rebecca wasn't married to Gerald, that's her father. But the family did fracture. Ethan, Rebecca's brother, issued a public statement saying he was appalled by his father's conduct and was cooperating with investigators. My Aunt Linda reached out, apologizing for distancing herself and asking if we could rebuild our relationship. I told her I'd think about it. Some bridges, once burned, don't rebuild easily. The trial was scheduled for September 2025, but Gerald accepted a plea deal in July. He pled guilty to 3 counts of breach of fiduciary duty and 1 count of fraud in exchange for the other charges being dropped. He was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay $340,000 in restitution to the affected beneficiaries. His real estate license was permanently revoked. Philip Cortland was disbarred. Rebecca never apologized. She moved to California shortly after her father's sentencing, and I haven't heard from her since. I don't expect to. Some people never admit they were wrong. They just disappear and start over somewhere else, carrying their delusions with them. Dr. Reeves followed up with me in August, asking how I was processing everything. I told her I felt vindicated, but also exhausted. "That's normal," she said. "You've been fighting for over a year to prove something you already knew was true. Victory doesn't erase the cost of the battle." She was right. I'd won, but I'd lost something too. The illusion that family was unconditional, that love couldn't be weaponized, that truth would always surface quickly. I'd learned that some people will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their narrative, even when the narrative is a lie. And I'd learned that fighting back is exhausting, expensive, and lonely, but sometimes it's the only option. On October 3rd, 2025, 1 year after my grandfather's death, I visited his grave. I brought flowers, sat on the grass beside the headstone, and told him everything that had happened. The edited photos, the probate fight, the investigation, the trial. I told him I'd used his letter and his email to prove the truth. I told him I'd made sure Gerald couldn't do to anyone else what he'd tried to do to me. And I told him I missed him, that I wished he were here to see how it all turned out, that I hoped, wherever he was proud. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the cemetery. I stayed until the light faded, then drove home. My phone buzzed with a message from Aunt Linda. She'd sent me a photo, one of the original unedited pictures from the funeral. I was in it, standing beside my grandfather's casket, my hand on the polished wood, my head bowed. She'd captioned it, "This is the real story. This is who you are." I saved the photo and set it as my phone's lock screen. Not because I needed proof anymore, but because I wanted to remember. Remember that I'd been there, that I'd honored him, that no amount of editing could change what actually happened. The truth was the truth, whether Gerald acknowledged it or not. And in the end, the truth was what survived. Gerald was in prison. His reputation was destroyed. His family was fractured. And I was still here, still standing, still the grandson my grandfather had been proud of. That was the story that mattered. Not the one in the edited photos, but the one written in court records, investigative reports, and the memories of everyone who'd actually been there. You can erase someone from a photograph, but you can't erase them from reality. Gerald tried, and it cost him everything. I didn't need revenge. The truth was, revenge enough. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.